The case was considered simple from the very beginning, not because there was no tragedy, but because it looked familiar. A quiet residential district, an old apartment building, constructed in a time when housing was designed for function, not comfort, no glass elevators, no cameras on every floor, no constant sense of observation. Very little happened here. That was precisely why the police were rarely called. In neighborhoods like this, death rarely looks suspicious. It arrives quietly, and almost always comes with a convenient explanation. The woman was in her early 30s. She lived alone. She worked. She had no conflicts with neighbors or colleagues. Her life followed a simple pattern. Morning, work, evening, home, sometimes a store, sometimes a short walk. Nothing that raised concern, nothing that would stay in someone's memory. As one investigator later put it, her life was too normal to attract attention. Her body was discovered early in the morning. She was lying on the bed, fully clothed, calm. There were no visible signs of distress, no overturned furniture, no broken objects. The windows were closed. The door was locked from the inside. At first glance, it looked like sudden death, the kind that is quickly attributed to heart failure or to an undiagnosed medical condition. Cases like this are usually closed quickly. There is rarely a reason to slow down. But one experienced investigator did slow down. Someone who had seen enough apartments where death arrived unexpectedly. Someone who knew what ordinary looked like. Almost immediately, he said something felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not violently wrong, just wrong. The apartment was too clean, too orderly, as if someone had made a careful effort to erase several hours of her life. During the initial medical examination, no clear cause of death could be determined. There were no fractures, no stab wounds, no obvious signs of suffocation, nothing that would explain why a healthy woman in her 30s had died overnight. But the investigator noticed something most people would have ignored. Faint pressure marks on her wrists, not bruises, not cuts, just subtle impressions, as if someone had been holding her hands slightly longer than necessary. To an untrained eye, they meant nothing. To someone who had worked dozens of similar cases, they meant hesitation. Another detail stood out almost immediately. Her phone was missing. Her bag was still in the apartment. Her wallet was untouched. Her documents were where they should be. The absence of the phone didn't fit. People who leave their homes take their phones. People who plan to stay do not misplace them. Someone had taken it deliberately. Neighbors were questioned shortly after. No one reported screams, no arguments, no loud noises during the night. Nothing unusual. Only one resident, a woman living on the floor below, mentioned seeing her the previous evening. She wasn't alone. She was with a man. There was nothing suspicious about him. Calm, polite, the kind of person who blends into the background. And that was precisely what unsettled investigators, because people who are difficult to remember often prefer it that way. While waiting for the toxicology results, investigators began reconstructing the timeline. Not the events as they were believed to have happened, but the events as they could be verified. Mobile carrier records showed that her last phone call was made at approximately 9:40 p.m. The call was short, less than a minute. No messages followed, no missed calls, no unanswered attempts to reach anyone. Just a brief connection, and then silence. She had called her former partner. He was questioned first. It was logical. It was expected. Former relationships are always examined, not because they are always relevant, but because they often leave traces. The man stated that he had been asleep at the time of the call. Phone geolocation confirmed his statement. Cameras near his building showed no movement, no exits, no returns. Everything aligned. His alibi was clean. With that, the most obvious explanation disappeared. The investigation slowed. There were no forced entry points, no witnesses, no signs of struggle, nothing that suggested an intrusion. nothing that suggested violence. The apartment itself became the focus again. Investigators walked through the rooms. Slowly, more than once, they looked for what didn't belong, for what felt out of place. And that was when attention returned to the building itself. The elevator. It was old, black and white, low resolution, often malfunctioning, often ignored. But that evening, it had been operational. The footage showed the woman entering the elevator at approximately 8:55 p.m. She was not alone. A man stood beside her, dark jacket, cap pulled low, his face partially hidden by shadow. They did not speak, at least not visibly. They stood close, but not intimately. Nothing that suggested familiarity, nothing that suggested tension. The elevator reached her floor. They stepped out. The next recorded moment appeared more than an hour later, 10:12 p.m. The elevator descended, empty. No one entered. No one exited. No other movements were recorded in that interval. That gap mattered. If the man had left the apartment through the door, he would have been seen. If he had used the elevator, there would have been a record, but there was nothing. That meant the apartment had not been left in an ordinary way. Investigators returned once more. This time, their attention shifted toward the balcony. Third floor, not especially high. For someone in reasonable physical condition, it was manageable. Subtle scuff marks were found on the railing, marks that were easy to overlook, easy to dismiss as age or weather. But below the balcony, in the soil, a faint shoe print was visible. Not clear enough to identify a brand, not clear enough to determine size, but clear enough to confirm movement. Someone had climbed over the railing, someone had gone down. The apartment had not been sealed after all. The assumption of isolation collapsed. Days passed. The toxicology results arrived quietly, without urgency, without emphasis. The woman had been poisoned. The substance was rare, odorless, tasteless, difficult to detect without targeted testing. It was not household chemicals, not medication from a personal supply, not something that enters the body by accident. This was not a coincidence. This was planned. The discovery of poison changed the direction of the investigation, quietly, but completely. Until that moment, there had been uncertainty. Now there was intent. Poison requires preparation, access, knowledge. It does not belong to chance. The search narrowed, not outward, but inward. Investigators reviewed the limited list of people who had crossed her path recently. Colleagues, neighbors, volunteers. There was no pattern at first, no repeated presence, no obvious fixation. But one name appeared again. Not frequently, but consistently. A man connected to a community center where the woman had volunteered several months earlier. At the time, nothing about him stood out. He was quiet, reserved. He did not draw attention, which is why, at first, no one remembered him clearly. Records showed that he had volunteered intermittently. Not every day, not on a strict schedule. Enough to be present, not enough to be noticed. He had no criminal history, no prior complaints, no formal connection to the victim, but timelines began to align. On several evenings, he had been present at the same time as the woman. He had learned her routine, not intentionally, at least not visibly. Arrival times, departure patterns, which days she stayed longer, which days she left early. Small details, collected over time. The kind of information that appears harmless on its own, but becomes meaningful when assembled. When questioned, the man did not deny knowing her. He did not deny being in the building that evening. He spoke calmly, without defensiveness, without visible anxiety. He explained his presence as a coincidence, a shared volunteer activity, a familiar environment. When asked about the apartment, he paused, just briefly, then acknowledged that he had been there. He denied harming her, denied any violent intent. According to him, there was no conflict, no argument, no struggle. He described the encounter as controlled, measured. He said he had not planned to kill her. He said it had been an experiment. He was curious. He wanted to see how far he could go. He spoke without raising his voice, without justification, without visible emotion. That composure unsettled investigators, more than anger would have, more than denial, because it suggested distance, not from the act, but from its consequence. Further investigation revealed that he had once studied medicine. Briefly, he had not completed his education, but he had learned enough to understand dosage, enough to understand delay, enough to understand how symptoms could be misinterpreted. The poison had not acted immediately. That had been intentional. It created uncertainty. It delayed suspicion. By the time effects appeared, the opportunity to intervene was gone. This was not an impulsive act. It was calculated, not driven by emotion, not driven by anger, driven by observation. The man was detained shortly after. There was no resistance, no attempt to flee, no visible shock. During formal questioning, he remained consistent, calm, precise. He acknowledged being in the apartment, acknowledged administering the substance, but rejected the word intent. According to him, there was no motive in the conventional sense, no anger, no jealousy, no resentment. He described the event as an observation, a controlled situation. He said he wanted to understand how a person reacts when control is gradually removed. He spoke as if describing a process, not a person. Investigators noted the absence of emotional language. He did not refer to the woman by name, not once. When asked why he chose her, he did not give a direct answer. He said she was accessible, predictable, unremarkable, that she fit the conditions. The poison was selected carefully, not for speed, not for pain, but for delay. Delay allowed distance. Delay created uncertainty. By the time symptoms became apparent, the narrative of natural causes was already forming. This was not an act designed to be seen. It was designed to disappear. The missing phone supported that design, not to conceal evidence immediately, but to delay reconstruction. Without it, the timeline fractured. The elevator footage filled only part of the gap. The rest remained absent. The balcony route explained the exit, but not the decision. The court proceedings were brief, methodical. The evidence was sufficient. The verdict was delivered. He was found guilty. But among investigators, the case did not close because it did not fit established patterns. There was no emotional escalation, no conflict history, no financial incentive. There was only curiosity. Curiosity without urgency, curiosity without attachment. A motive that offers no warning signs. One investigator later described it as the most dangerous type of intent, not because it is violent, but because it is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not repeat patterns. It observes. Cases like this are rarely remembered for their facts. They are remembered for what cannot be explained. The missing moments, the decisions that lack context, the spaces between recorded events. What remains is not a complete story. It is a reconstruction. And reconstructions are always incomplete. OBREX does not provide conclusions. It preserves fragments. The interpretation remains open.